Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today to talk about one of my very favorite topics, adjusting your style for success using the DISC personality and behavior assessment. So we're going to jump into a whole bunch of stuff today, but just a little background on me is on the slide here. I welcome LinkedIn connections from anybody on the call. Feel free to drop me a connection. I've been in the TA space for a very long time. I've been here at HireClix a little over 4 years, and myself, as well as Rachel and 3 other members of our team here at HireClix are certified DISC coaches. So we as an organization really believe in the DISC and the power it can have to really help us all be more effective when we communicate with others, whether those are others in our personal or professional lives, whether they are our bosses or our direct reports, our clients or our hiring managers, whatever it might be. So we really have a lot of strong belief in the DISC and are really thrilled to share it with you all today. So we're going to do an overview of the DISC behavioral styles. There are 4 primary styles in the DISC, and we'll dive in a little bit into each of those. And then we'll talk about how you can determine other people's styles, and that will then allow you to adjust how you approach communicating with those individuals. So those are the big pieces we'll have today. Like Rachel said, add any questions as you go along. I do have them up on my screen. I don't always notice when they come in. So I may be able to answer them as they come in, but at a minimum, Rachel will share them with me at the end. And if for any reason we don't get to your question, feel free to respond to the email when Rachel sends out the recording, and make sure that way I'll make sure I can answer for you. So again, thank you all for your time today, and let's jump in. So what is DISC is really where we want to start. And DISC is an assessment that really looks at people's behaviors. It's not emotions, it's not really personality. It's really the way you interact with others is what DISC is looking at. And DISC has 4 primary styles, and you can see the D, the I, the S, and the C, and they each have a term associated with them. And they're really focused on 4 different ways that you interact with the world. Your D style is how you make decisions. Your interactive is really on how you interact, influence, relate to others specifically. S in stabilizing talks about the pace at which you prefer to move. And the C of cautious is how you handle rules that are set by others. And every one of us has some amount of each of these behaviors. And when you do an actual assessment, it's usually about a 20-minute online assessment, you'll get really a lot of detail around which of these behaviors you are prone to that are your preferred style, is the term we use in DISC. So they really focus on 4 predictable areas of conflict. And I'll give a lot of examples today related to those of us in the recruiting and TA space or HR, just to kind of bring it home. But as you can all imagine, a lot of this applies to whatever career field you're in. It can apply to your personal lives. You can really start to use some of the skills you learned through DISC and by completing an assessment and a workshop to help your improvement. You improve communicating in all areas of your life. But we really look at those 4 kind of major areas. Possible conflicts are over problems and people, consistency, pace. Those are things that you could potentially have areas of conflict with others, or your procedures and strengths. Those of us that prefer to follow rules versus those of us that prefer to break the rules. Those are areas where you can perceive some conflict. And that's where the DISC helps us most effectively communicate when there are areas of conflict, allowing you to understand others' preferred styles, their preferred approach. And so you can adjust your style in order to be most effective with any individual. So let's look at each of those in a little bit more detail. What you're seeing here on the screen is each of the 4 behaviors, the D, the I, the S, and the C across the top, and which of those areas of conflict they tend to address. So the decisive style, or D, addresses problems. And you look at what are different behaviors. Someone who has a high D score in their assessment, some of these words would apply to them more. They tend to be more driving and forceful, a little more daring. on the high D end. And those of us that are lower on the D score are more agreeable and mild, might be conservative decision makers. One of the big important things to understand about DISC and DISC behaviors is that there's no good or bad. There's no right or wrong. We all have a little bit of each of these 4 styles in us, kind of ingredients in a cake that you're making. Some of us might have more of one or the other, and we are also all able to adjust our style as needed, which is where we're going to spend a lot of time today. The I focuses on how you interact with people. High I's are more persuasive and gregarious, enthusiastic. Folks who are on the scored lower on the I, a little bit more withdrawn, a little bit more quiet. I's are probably the easiest styles to detect out there in the world. High I's tend to talk with their hands. They might be the people at the party that are in the middle of a large group of folks. Those are very, very easy behaviors to observe. S stands for stabilizing, and that's really the pace at which you like to move. So folks that score high in an S, or their high I style, they tend to be more predictable and passive. They tend to have more routines. They're not the most spontaneous individuals in the world. They like things to be planned in advance. That person amongst your friends that is always planning the outings and the vacations, they very well may have a very high S because they like to have plans in place. If you're on the lower side of S, you already used the word spontaneous. Those that are lower S may be a little bit more spontaneous, maybe more outgoing. They, you might want to call them impetuous. So there's a lot of things that come with the high S. And the C is the last of the 4 behaviors, and it's talking about cautious. And this is really your preference for establishing rules and procedures. High C's are often easy to identify because they're going to be the perfectionists. They hate to be wrong. They will get into a lot of detail, make sure they have all of the information before they make a decision or communicate on something. A little bit more cautious. Your highly analytical folks often land here as a high C. On the lower end, a little more careless. You're breaking the rules versus following the rules. Might be the rebel in your family or in your group at work. So those are the 4 styles. And again, no right, no wrong, no good or bad. It's just talking about, the degrees. And many of us will fall on the spectrums from high to low across all 4 styles. The vast majority of people who have taken a DISC assessment have 2 of these styles that are considered high. So I'll use myself as an example. I'm both a high I and a high D. I believe Rachel is a high S and a high C. So we make a good combination working together because our preferences are different and we don't have any blind spots. Rachel's making sure that I've got everything I need to do this presentation well in advance. I know all of the procedures, I've got my links, all of those things are ready to go. If that wasn't done, I might have run in this conference room about 5 minutes before and hoped that we could figure it out. So we're really able to balance each other well. And it makes a lot of difference in particularly your professional life and understanding each other's styles. So I'm going to walk through each of the styles in a little bit more detail. I've hit kind of the highlights here to give you a better sense. When I get through these, we're going to put up a poll to ask you which style you think you are. So be thinking through as I'm talking what might be your most likely style. So the high Ds, that's about 13% of the population. They're really people who are enjoying challenges. They want action. Those people that really take action right away. They're very focused on the results and the outcome. Those are really people. Those are really people who identify as that high D. You can observe a lot of the high D behaviors by seeing some of these things. They're going to be strong body language with, well, a strong handshake or maybe an elbow bump here in our current COVID situation. They will definitely be making direct eye contact. They do speak with their hands as well. They aren't really that concerned about opinions. They want to know facts. So thinking about the people and yourself that might behave this way, this is really the way to help identify who they are. You know, I like the target piece here. They're ready, fire, aim. So they're just ready to get going and make something happen very, very quickly. They move quickly, they're fast, they might be a little abrupt in how they communicate from time to time, and they always have something going on. High Ds rarely sit still. Come on. Oops, went too far. Our high Is. So high Is are about 1/4 of the population. So we've got more Is typically out there than we do the high Ds. These are your social and optimistic people, folks who describe themselves as a people person. We do tend to have a lot of high Is in recruiting and HR. Really like to entertain, thinking of the folks in your social circle who are always hosting the parties, inviting people over, surrounded with a large number of friends. I actually have a very close friend who's a very high I. She's getting married next month, and there are 11 of us in her wedding, just bridesmaids, because she has that many close friends. So think about the people that have high Is. In the professional setting, these are the folks that are always involved in the groups, maybe the diversity groups, or they're interested in being on special committees, and they really want to connect with people and the opportunity to communicate. Pretty engaging. High Is really have a need to kind of build a rapport and make folks feel connected and comfortable. They really like to be liked by others. So, as you go into meetings, whoever is facilitating the meeting, high Is tend to be the ones that allow for a lot of kind of opening conversation that isn't work related, and that really just gives everybody a chance to kind of connect with each other and learn about each other. And so how do you find them? Again, these are all behaviors. So these are things you can observe in the people around you and start to have a sense of what their style might be. And like I said earlier, they tend to talk with their hands, lots of facial expressions. You always know what a high I is feeling because you can just look straight at them. If they're happy, sad, angry, excited, you have a pretty good idea of where you stand. They're the big huggers. High Is tend to be big huggers as well. Big smiles, really friendly. They do kind of skip around a lot. High Is are known to meander and ramble. When they're telling stories, you might need to pull them back in, or when they're presenting, they often have kind of go into an offshoot of something that catches their attention. They're really looking for the people focus and that connection. May not necessarily pay attention to a lot of the details. So they like the big picture. They like to get people excited and moving in a certain direction, but how folks get from step 1 to step 2 might not be their strength. Let's move on to the S. So the S style, this is the largest percentage of the population. Here at HireClix, we are a very heavy S organization. As we've all done the assessment and been through lots of workshops, and we have a lot of high S here on our team. Definitely stable, cooperative, huge team players. Think about the folks at work who are always stepping up to help out the team. They will sometimes put the team before themselves. They want recognition for everyone around them. It's real. They talk in the we, not me, very, very often. They might also be the people that are a little resistant to the change. They don't believe in change for change's sake. But if you can show them why and how it could help the organization, they're very, very likely to come along, but they're not going to just jump in and change. So how do you identify them? They tend to have a lower voice and be very warm and methodical. I mentioned earlier, they have a little bit of a poker face. You might not be able to tell what they're feeling. I always describe the many S's in my professional life. I call them the ducks. You think about a duck floating on top of the water, everything looks calm and easy, but underneath their little feet are going like this, like 100,000 miles an hour. So they're really able to keep that in and keep that calm demeanor. Think of the folks in your organization who can kind of alleviate the stress, help people calm down. Those are likely pretty high S people in your organization. You look at some of the body language, they will gesture with their hands, probably not as wildly and expressively as an I might, but they tend to be more people focused versus data or task focused individuals. They like to be able to support people. Any role where they can really be helping to prop other people up and getting them what they need in the background is really, really a role that they enjoy. They like a logical pace. They want to know what the plan is in advance. And the final style is the C, and this is the cautious style. And so they're about a quarter of the population in general as well. They plan ahead. They always look at all of the data. They are most concerned with accuracy. Across the course of my career, I have like most of the folks in finance and accounting and contracts tend to be pretty high Cs. They're very much drawn to that detail required. I missed a slide. I'll just talk about the C's. Not sure where that slide went. So they are continually checking for accuracy. They aren't going to have a lot of emotions. They are definitely not going to be the people starting the meeting by catching up on the weekend or what happened on whatever show everybody is watching. They really want to get down to business. They're focused on accuracy, on results, on making that happen, but they are always the ones who ask for more data. Think about the people in your organization who you have to bring the spreadsheets to, and you have to justify the why. They're not just going to trust that because you said it, that is the way that it should be. They want to see the data behind that. And we all have those types of roles in our organization, and even in HR and talent acquisition, we definitely have a lot of data-driven people who could really be considered that high C. Whoops. There they are. I missed it. Okay, so a couple of things I hid in there. They're not going to gesture. They can seem intense. Think about the people that are really intense in your organization. They want that quality answer. So let's do a quick review. There's a lot of information here, and Rachel's going to be sending out the slides, so you will have this as a great resource. And again, we're talking about behaviors and how people behave. So these are things that you can definitely observe. Might be a little bit harder over the last 15 months or so over Zoom and video, but when you get back in person, you can definitely tell some of these things. I've also got some ways to identify styles based on email, so feel free to reach out to me if you want that information as well, because that may be the main way you communicate with some folks. So for each of these areas, we talk about tone of voice and body language and what pace they tend to move. Our cautious and stabilizing, our high C and high S folks like that slow and methodical pace. They want an order to things. They can bring order to chaos, which is something an S is really, really good at, is helping us get there. S's may be the ones that avoid difficult situations. They avoid conflict. They're not comfortable there at all. Many of us might identify with that as well. If you look at some of the other areas from pace, your high D's and your high I's are the ones that tend to be moving pretty quickly. They tend to be a little bit more big picture focused. They could be those that are getting you and your team really excited about a big goal, something that you're after, a new way of doing things. I's particularly are very persuasive. You see a lot of salespeople tend to be high I's, much like recruiters and HR, where you can find some of those folks. The S and the D are probably the most ubiquitous. Those folks kind of turn up in a whole lot of roles as you start to identify where you might fit in this style. So let's go ahead and launch the poll about what is your style. Now that you've had the chance to think about it a little bit, I'm going to have Rachel put the poll up here, and I'm going to go back one slide so you can see the review. So we have a chance for you to take a view and tell me what you are, and that way I can kind of tailor the rest of this discussion around styles that you all are, in the event that maybe we work out to be somewhat the same distribution as the group as a whole. Are we good on the poll, Rachel, or do I need to launch it? Okay, I need to launch it. So here we go. Okay, now the poll is up. So thinking about yourself, what is your one primary style? I did say that many of us have two, but I'm asking you just to pick the one that you think is your primary style based on what we've talked about so far. All right, I think we've got everybody voting here. A couple still left. A couple more seconds if you haven't had a chance to vote. Okay, so I'm going to end that and then share it. So you can take a look at, no surprise here, I have got a bunch of talent acquisition, HR folks most likely on the call. So we've got a overabundance of high I's, the interactive folks. We still have some representatives for people who believe they've got a high S or a high C, and decisive as well. So this can be pretty powerful. Understanding your own style first is really where you want to start. So let's move to a second exercise. No poll for this one, but want you all to take a few minutes, maybe think about 2 or 3 people in your professional life, whether that could be your manager, a colleague, or someone in another department you're trying to work with on a project, someone who reports to you. For all my recruiters out there, you know, your toughest hiring manager, your toughest internal client or external client, for those of you that are in the staffing space. So take a few minutes and think about what style might those individuals be. What we're going to do with the latter half of the session is talk about how you can adjust your style to be effective with them. So I will give you just another moment to think of a couple of those folks. All right, so let's talk about adjusting your style. This is really the most valuable part of the session today. So high Ds, and you know, I mentioned here at HireClix, we've got a lot of high S. We've got a good number of high I's as well. We don't have a whole lot of high D's. And when we were first rolling this out and you start talking about the D style, for some folks, a D can be really overwhelming. And again, if there's no good or bad, it's the perception you're coming from. Those of you that are high I's, what you have in common with a high D is that you both think big picture. You both like to you sell and be persuasive around things, getting people to agree with you. D's are a little bit more focused on winning. But when you're looking at how to communicate them, you know, you want to stick to business. They don't need to hear the whole story about what you did over the weekend. You want to come prepared. That is probably the most effective thing you can do when working with a high D. So if you have a high D hiring manager, don't go into your strategy call or your intake call just saying, oh, what are you looking for? Tell me a little bit about this role. Their expectation is you're going to come prepared with some information. You're going to come say, oh, we've hired for this position in the past. This is what has worked for us. Let me give you data on what's going on in the market, what salaries are, how competitive it's getting today. You want to think through and prepare before you start working with the high D. And the one at the bottom on what works is provide options. High Ds like to be the decision makers. So you want to make sure that you give them options to pick from, not just one way to go, but give them options to pick from so that they have made that decision and they will get behind decisions that they make, particularly if you've given them the supporting material. They don't have a lot of tolerance for loopholes or ways out of things, and definitely disorganization will really kind of upset a high D. So as you're thinking about preparing to meet with them, if you can send stuff in advance, they're not going to read it. They aren't going to read it. But if you can send it in advance, they will feel like you're very organized and you're prepared, and you will immediately have credibility with them walking in the door. So here's some additional points on how they communicate. So again, you're thinking about if you have a high D that you are working with, they want to make decisions, but they want to do it quickly. They're not going to wait for you to go gather the data. They want you to give it what you have to them as quickly as possible. They want to speed up. I already mentioned their need to win. They love the top line, big picture concepts. So if you're trying to sell a high D on a candidate, for example, you want to give here's the big picture of what this person's going to bring to your team. Here's what they can do for the organization. You want to give those big, broad brush strokes and get them excited about the big picture. That is really going to help you win them over because that's how they like to communicate. So let's move on to the high I. So the high I's, they're going to be the warm and friendly. They do focus on people and action items. They want to know what's going on. You definitely want to give high I's time to voice their opinion. So when you're working with high I's, you need to plan to allow time for them to just talk, for them to think out loud. Most of us that are high I's think to talk or talk to think versus thinking to talk. We have to kind of work it all out verbally. So, be prepared to give that time and have those conversations. You walk into the meeting and whatever engagement you have with them with something you can connect with them on. For me, knowing there's so many high I's in our industry, if I'm going to work with a new client, I look up the people on the team on LinkedIn, get a sense for what do we have in common? Where we've connected, are we in the same groups? That's always a really great thing for me to open with. And they'll also tell me if those people are high I's whenever I start talking about non-business things. If they don't really give me a lot of response, then I just move on back to business. But trying to find out what you have in common with those folks, your internal leaders, what do you have in common with the executives? Check out their bios. What can you tell them? We went to the same school or we grew up nearby each other. Finding something that you can connect with personally with a high I will kind of have them bring you into their circle, and they will want to interact with you. They'll keep things moving quickly. Those of us that are high I's joke that we're the ones working on something else, and all of a sudden we're like, oh, there's a squirrel over there. I must go get it. Shiny object. They will definitely move from one shiny object to the next. So kind of giving them back the opportunity to come back in and focus on that big picture. They are also big picture folks. High I's get really excited about the opportunity to shape and mold things. So if you're trying to get them to come along on a new idea, you really want to show them, here's what this can do. Here's how it can improve where we're at, help us meet the goals that we're after. And here is the role that you can play. You want to make sure you give I's a role when you are trying to get them to get on your side or champion something that you are really excited about, passionate about. They like to be collaborative. It is not wise to ask an I to go sit in a room and do something by him or herself. They want a team, they want peers, they want a variety of folks. They want to be able to collaborate on a solution, and they're most effective when they can do that. If you're thinking about the fact that they tend to think out loud, they need somebody to think out loud with, not just talking to the wall, that makes them that much more effective. High I's like to be liked. They want to be friends with people. You can start to, I'm sure many of you are nodding because about 3/4 of you all are high I's. More social environment. Again, that's why you're attracted in many ways to the industry that we're in, because you have the opportunity to interact with a whole lot of different people, whether it's candidates and hiring managers, vendors, whatever it might be. You're really giving them that social environment. These are the folks that are going to come to happy hour. You actually are probably going to be able to influence them at happy hour because they are in their prime, they're in their element when they're in a social situation. They want the big picture, and you can use emotions with them, about how is this going to make people feel. High D's don't care about that. They just want to know what the bottom line data is, but your high I's are really going to give you that opportunity to help them understand an emotion. So those of you that aren't high I's, there's a few of you on this call here, things to keep in mind. What I'm saying to you may be making you very uncomfortable. I don't want to go to happy hour with these people. I don't need to interact with them beyond work. just finding that something, that one thing that you can connect with them on. Maybe you have friends that worked at a similar connections that worked at the same company or might know each other. That's really just going to give you a little bit of a connection to them. You don't have to try to match anybody's style. You don't have to chameleon yourself into something that you're not. Just having a plan for how you want to interact with them and you want to be able to be as effective as possible will really, really be valuable to the high I's. Your S's are the next one. And this is, like I said, almost 40% of the population is a high S. So you're going to uncover a lot of high S's in your career. S's are people focused. They're just not as gregarious and kind of over the top as some of your high I's. They like to break the ice. They also want a personal connection. So as you're thinking about high S's that you need to interact with, a personal connection here would be really good. They need sincerity. High S's have a really good BS meter. They will be able to tell you if they think someone is just trying to pull the wool over your eyes. So if you're trying to sell to a high S, you definitely want to make sure you're being sincere. Don't give them the one-liners, the gimmicky statements. They're going to see right through that. They just want to hear and feel sincerity. Giving them time to think. This is really important. And again, since so many of you are high I's, we tend to move at a pretty quick pace. Be okay with the silence. That's kind of challenging for a high I to just let there be silence. But when you're working with high S's as well as C's that we'll get to in a minute, you need to give them time to think and respond. This is a great group to send information to in advance. So if you are having a meeting with your hiring manager tomorrow and you've done that prep work, send it today so they have the opportunity to absorb it. And high S's will make and find the time. They will absorb it before the meeting so that they're ready to have a rich conversation around it. With high D's and high I's, you can just put it in front of them in the meeting and they're comfortable kind of talking as they go and thinking as they go. High S's need more time. So sending them things in advance will really help your communication with them. As you're thinking about who's a high S in your professional life, if you aren't doing that regularly, you will greatly improve your communication. We've got a lot of high S's here on the team at HireClix, like I mentioned. So I've had to adjust my style to send people things in advance. I don't need that, but others really do. And the difference it makes is really, really incredible. Thinking about just interviewers, you probably might have a lot of interviewers who are high S's. Make sure they have the candidate's resume the day before. If you do a structured interview process and they're assigned certain things to interview for, make sure they have that information at least a day before so they can absorb. It's really important with high S's as well as C's that you give them that time. And don't expect them to make a decision in a meeting on the fly. That makes high S's incredibly uncomfortable. They want time to think about it. They want to weigh all of their options. So again, when you're planning, make sure that you have that time to give them the opportunity to think about that. If your boss is a high S and you're asking for something, like you want to take a training class or get a certification, or you're asking for a raise, don't expect them to answer you in that conversation. Give them time, set a schedule. S's love schedules. Tell them, I'm going to give you 48 hours to think about this. You don't need to respond right now, but can we meet on Friday and catch back up on that? That will immediately put them at ease. And when you're asking for stuff, that's what you want, is to put the decision maker at ease. So definitely giving them that time will be really valuable and put them in a good spot to make the best decision. Like the high I's, don't rush into business. Have a little bit of time to connect on whatever it is you connect with. Just thinking about the people that you work with, those folks who kind of always start off with, they're asking you something about your kids or your hobbies or whatever it might be. That's likely a high S or potentially a high I. That's where they typically start. Loud and demanding, yelling does not work with high S's. So if you are a leader and you may be prone to raising your voice or even just getting overly excited about things, you can really cause a high S to shut down. And I'm spending a little bit more time on this one because most of us probably have a lot of high S's in our life. And things to do to communicate. They can be introverted. They're warm and they want to connect, but they are not going to be the person at the happy hour that has 10 people standing around them while they're telling a story or an anecdote of some sort. If they are telling a story to a group, they're going to be a little quieter. They're not going to be extremely animated about it, but they like to connect with people, and they're probably more comfortable in a slightly smaller group. Giving them the how and the why. S's don't like to move at a very quick pace. They tend to be resistant to change. And unlike the high C's, they can be persuaded though if they understand why. This is back to giving them information in advance. If you give them the data and the reasons, and it doesn't even have to be data, it can just be anecdotal reasons or qualitative information, and time to think about it and justify why you're trying to go the direction you are, you're going to have a much better communication. They want security. Security is definitely one of their highest needs. So in difficult economic times, if your industries have been through some roller coasters over the last year or so, your S's have probably had some of the most stress over that. So that's another way you might identify who your high S's in your professional world are. High C. So again, our high C's are really like order, and they're your rule followers. I always think of my group of friends and who's make sure we don't break any of the rules. And those are most likely your high C's. Same thing at work. Those that want you to follow the process, who push back on we high I's, who just want to kind of do things in our own order. Those could be really high C folks in your professional life. They want straightforward and direct. They don't need you to connect with them in any way. That doesn't mean that a high C doesn't have connections and doesn't have friends. They definitely do. They just don't lead with that. And in a professional setting, it's not always something that is top of mind. So if you try to start off with connecting with them over the weekend and they give you short answers, that's an identification. They could be a C, they could be a D, but you don't need to make all of those connections. They want you to stick to business. They like the multiple options, but they, like your high D's, need you to be prepared. And the difference will be high D's, you can come into the meeting and just talk to them about the data that you have. With high C's, you want to give it to them in advance and give them that opportunity to absorb and think about it and ask why. High C's sometimes can be like a 3-year-old. They ask why about everything. It's not them being ridiculous or trying to be obstinate with you. They really just want to understand. They really enjoy getting the why and the reasons behind things. I like the second to last line under what works in using comparative data. So if you've got a high C hiring manager, for example, which folks who you might be hiring in engineering, we've got a lot of high C's there. You want to be able to show them, if we hire a systems engineer at a level 2, here are the salary ranges that we're seeing in the market today. If we go up to a level 3, this is what happens to the salary ranges. That can help them make a decision about, what level of person do they really need and what can they afford. So bringing that comparative data forward, again, in advance of your conversation about the position, be really important. If you're going back to a high C hiring manager because sourcing, you're just not having any luck with sourcing. You're not finding the people with the profile that they want at the salary they're willing to pay. You need to bring them that data. You need to show them, here are 4 or 5 candidates that met what you were after, that I talked to on a phone screen. I thought they were really solid. They were a good cultural fit, but their salary was $20,000 over what you want to pay. That kind of information will help sway them. Maybe you need them to consider going up in the salary or down in the requirements. So giving them that information, that comparative data, and then options as well. We could go up in salary and here's what your candidate pool could potentially look like. Or we could go down in requirements and here's what your candidate pool could look like. They are going to be much more likely, A, to trust you and believe give you a lot of credit and credibility, but then they're more likely to make that decision, whichever way it might be. but also giving them time. They need time like your high S's. They need sometimes a little bit more time because they really want to get into the data. I think of high C's that I've worked with across my career. They don't want me to just send them like a PDF of the Excel analysis. They want the whole Excel document because they want to look at my pivot tables. They want to look at my calculations and my formulas. And it's not because they think I'm stupid or I don't know how to do it. They just enjoy understanding where all of it came from. For many of us that are high I's, that's kind of hard to understand. But again, it's not, the C's are really approaching that from the point of getting to the truth. What is the true data here? So giving them as much in advance and as much access to detail and to the how something happened will really, really help you with them. What's not working, overly over the top, loud, super informal, particularly with new candidate or new candidates, new hiring managers that you perceive to be a high C. You want to keep things a little more formal and business in the beginning. You will across time get to know high C's, and everyone can flex their style a little bit. And as they connect with you, you're going to learn a little bit more about them. And absolutely, when the pandemic is over, do not go hug these people without their absolute permission. They will be very uncomfortable. If you see them kind of stiffen up, that's a great sign that that person is a high C. And much like your high Ds, they don't want disorganization. I often can tell if someone might be a high C or a low C by what is going on their desk. Is their desk very neat, or is there literally nothing on it but the computer and a pen, and super neat and organized? That's a high C. Kind of chaotic piles of things everywhere. That's going to tell you they're probably a pretty low C. I joke with colleagues and clients as well that I'm not sitting in my house right now. I'm actually in HireClix headquarters in Gloucester, but where I sit at my desk and on Zoom, it looks brilliant and clean. I'm a very low C. I got piles of stuff on my desk. I got the glass I forgot to take downstairs this morning on the corner. That's one way to really be able to tell high C's versus low C's. Definitely introverted, a little more passive. These are how they like to communicate. I already talked about the why. Prove it is another one. One of the consultants here on the team's husband is an engineer, and I think she gets asked this question regularly. It's not just going to take your word for it. And it's not that they don't trust you or they don't like you. It's just that they need that data. Very, very detailed. And the last bullet here is really important. Do not send these people things riddled with typos, whether it's an email, a document that you need them to review. Like, be hyper vigilant. If you are not good at that kind of detail, get someone else to review your communication before you send it to them, because that will very much turn them off. So I know we had a few high C's on the call. I'm hoping that that's kind of ringing true for you as well, that that really drives you crazy. Those of you that are recruiters that can't stand typos in resumes, that you might have a little bit of high C in your behavior. So hitting on some takeaways. Everyone is a mix of all four styles. We all have some amount of each. Kind of think of it as ingredients as you're making something. Nothing's good or bad. These are observable behaviors. So these are things that as you get comfortable with the DISC, that you can start to kind of guesstimate what somebody's style is and in advance adjust how you communicate with them. The whole goal is really to be as effective as possible. I have a mentor that for years always asked me this question, Kara, do you want to be right or do you want to be effective? And the high D in me says, I want to be both, but sometimes being more effective is what's important. And when you think about how you communicate, it can really make a big difference. So that gets us to the end of how you can use the DISC and really adjust your style to help you be more effective. So I'm going to pause because I know Rachel's been watching the questions and she's going to feed a couple of them to me.
Thank you, Kara. That was great. The first question, I would like to introduce this concept to my entire team. How can I do that?
Great. So DISC is fantastic for entire teams. Like I mentioned here, we use it at HireClix across all of our teams and a lot that we do. How I would recommend you get started, we have a cadre of DISC coaches here. You're getting everyone to take the assessment, and you get a whole personalized report that is almost 50 pages long, actually. And it can be a little overwhelming. And you follow that report with a one-on-one session with one of the coaches that will help everybody go through and understand their own style. So that's kind of where DISC starts, is with understanding your own style. And then we can bring you together as a team and facilitate workshops so that you learn about the DISC, and it will be much more detailed than what we've done here in about 45 minutes, but learn about each other's styles and think about as a team how you can better communicate with each other. One of the exercises we do in that workshop is kind of have everybody do a round robin, and there's a page in your DISC assessment report that talks about how you like to communicate. And just sharing that with each other, knowing that Rachel needs the details in advance has helped Rachel and I work better together. Knowing that my high I's just really want to connect with people, and I'm okay kind of bringing my high I forward with them. Once you understand that and you kind of look at it as a team, you can start to be more effective as a team. And then we can grow from there, just do workshops, add to the workshop how to identify those other styles and adjust with your hiring managers and your candidates. There's so much that you can adjust with candidates to keep them connected with you, to be able to get the information you need with them. Feel free to reach out and drop me an email. You've got my email and my LinkedIn there. I'd be happy to follow up with you about what a workshop might look like and how it could benefit your team. And this works for teams of all sizes. 2 to 3 teams with 2 to 3 teams, as many as 30, 40 people on it, across the globe, across the country. We can definitely customize something for you.
Awesome. The next question. I work with a lot of high Ds. I think I'm a high S and can get overwhelmed by them. What can I do to increase my confidence in working with them?
That is a fantastic question. So one of our high S's out there, thank you for sharing that question. Like I mentioned, high Ds can be a little overwhelming. They move pretty quickly, and they want a lot of data, and they want you to be ready to answer questions. Preparation is really the key when communicating with the high D. So carve out enough time in your schedule to go over the spreadsheet that you're going to ask them to take a look at. They're not going to look at it until you are sitting in front of them, because they don't need that kind of time, but you feeling prepared. This is definitely something I see a lot of people struggle with. You get a trusted colleague to kind of role play the interaction with you, just so you have that time. As high S's, you're uncomfortable with a quick pace, but your high D wants to move at that pace. So as much time as you can spend really getting comfortable with what you want to go over and knowing your details and being prepared with it. S's like preparation, so you have a natural tendency there, and that can really help you. But from a high D, they're going to bring strategic decision making. They're going to be the risk takers in the group for sure. So you definitely be prepared to help them get the data to make those decisions and give them options. Really important with the high D. Given we can do option A, B, or C, here's what the results might look like. Where would you like to go? And they will have felt that they have the control of making that decision. So those are a few things that you can think about as a high S and how you want to interact with the high D.